arguably the most iconic and influential film soundtrack of all time. The soundtrack that put classical film scoring back on the map and set a course for the next few decades for film music. No soundtrack-related show could really start without talking about Star Wars. Welcome to the episode 1, episode 4 episode of Popcorn and Vinyl, the show dedicated to films, film scores, and vinyl. And like I mentioned in the intro, I don't think any self-respecting soundtrack show could really get off the ground with at some point talking about Star Wars. It's really become its own entity, and for a lot of people, that's what really got them into film scores and film music. And it's kind of globally recognized. You could go somewhere on the other side of the world, play them the main theme, and they'll know what you're talking about. In fact, in 2004, it was preserved by the Library of Congress into the National Recording Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And for so many people, it was either Star Wars or early John Williams work that really got them into the film music genre. In fact, it's actually even noted in some behind-the-scenes documentaries and interviews that the soundtrack is really what saved the film. There was a lot of early skepticism in early cuts of the film by whether it's film execs or filmmakers. They saw it and they really weren't seeing it until the actual score was added. It's at that point that they knew they had a hit on their hands. Now, over the years, there have been countless releases of this soundtrack. Now, originally it came out in June 1977, and that year it actually won the Oscar for Best Original Score, being out some incredible films. And since that time, there have been a number of releases on various formats in that time. There's been extended editions, remasters, and that sort of thing. But for the purpose of today's episode, we're going to be talking about the 40th Anniversary 3LP Collector's Edition. And you could tell that they wanted to make this a collector's item. It's got this beautiful kind of leatherette exterior box, and you could tell that I'm kind of like an Italian grandmother covering their couches, keeping the original plastic on to try and keep this safe from fingerprints as long as I can. Unfortunately, they don't really make outer sleeves for box sets, so I'm going to try and keep this on. Hopefully it doesn't actually damage the cover itself. But you can see it has this nice metal plate here, and as we slide it open, ooh, that feels nice. It reminds me of my wedding album. It's like super premium feeling, like really well built. We've got this nice embossed logo that kind of shines depending on how the light is hitting it. And then we can go through, and it's got this stunning 48-page book. You can see there's a lot of concept drawings that you as a Star Wars fan have probably seen numerous times, whether it is in documentaries, and to the point where I wish this actually wasn't in the book, because I've seen it in other books that I own. Like as a fan, I've got like The Art of Star Wars and that sort of thing. So it'd be nice to have something new in this book that we haven't really seen before, and more focus on the film score portion. You can see in the book, it does have behind-the-scenes footage of when they were actually shooting it. It does have some stuff from the scoring session, but that's where I would like a majority of the focus to go. I think myself and many other fans out there, we're here kind of for the John Williams goodness. We already have our kind of taste of Star Wars in other material. And let me tell you a little bit how cool of a film music nerd I am. Back in my college days, I had like a glossy 8x10 photo of John Williams on my wall, and people would come over and they'd be like, "Hey, is that your grandfather?" And I kind of explained, like, "No, that's the guy who writes music for Star Wars." And I got some really, really great looks from people, and I made better friends to the people that stuck around. And one of my friends even commented, like, "How does your wife keep her hands off of you?" I don't know. I guess this is the answer. As a film score fan, I would love more focus on the film scoring, showing the pictures of the original orchestra. John Williams hand writes his music, so seeing some of that, I think that'd be really cool to see and have more of a focus on in the book. But still, it's a gorgeous set, and any fan would be happy to have this. It has 2 essays, again, talking about sort of the impact of the music. So it's a great kind of companion piece. As you're listening to the actual soundtrack, it's awesome to read and kind of take that in as a fan. And it just gives you something kind of to do as you're listening, but kind of puts you in that mind frame. Now, interestingly enough, I'm not going to dive too deep into the music in this soundtrack just because it's been covered so extensively in the past. There have been, standalone documentaries. Scholars have written essays on it. You could see loads of analysis on this, and I don't think there's anything new that I could contribute that isn't kind of ripping off much wiser people than I am. So I'll take kind of a wider approach to looking at this to see if it makes sense for you as kind of a vinyl collector. If you want a really in-depth analysis, check out David W. Collins' podcast called The Soundtrack Show. And there he deconstructs the music, talks about its influences and its impact on the film. I highly recommend that. If you want a more surface level review, keep watching this. In its 40-year history, there have been numerous represses of this. Like I mentioned, there have been CD versions. The actual very first piece of music I ever bought was John Williams conducts the Star Wars trilogy. Was just like a nice compilation album, and this is what kind of really got me into that world. So, kind of looking at this as a piece of music, really what we're getting is a remastered version of that original 1977 release. It's the same tracks, same bits of music, just remastered. But this is actually where I have my problem, in that these are really just concert orchestrations of some of those key musical pieces. It's not a chronological order of the cues in the film, and that's where you really would want to go after one of those like extended edition, like 2 CD sets. That's where you're getting more of the music as heard in the film. These concert orchestrations, they provide a very different experience, and that's where I'm honestly very torn, and I can kind of contradict myself. So in one way, as a vinyl experience, because it's very active, you sit there and you kind of take in the music as if you're enjoying a concert of this music. Whereas kind of conversely, you or myself personally, I really like to hear all the music. I feel a lot that I'm actually missing from the soundtrack. There's certain cues that I think are pretty critical or that I really like that aren't featured in this album, which is kind of a disappointment. And because of its non-chronological order, sometimes it really takes you out of the listening mode just emotionally, because you get a certain feel in one piece, and then all of a sudden you're listening to the Cantina Band. So it's kind of jarring, and all of a sudden you're listening to something that just doesn't flow with the same kind of emotional flow of the actual film. So that's where this may or may not be for you. And for me, that's my biggest bugaboo with this score. Now, one thing about the music I do want to add is I did do a little bit of critical listening. I listened to it on 2 different turntables and 3 different sort of speaker setups. I wanted to make sure I got a good experience of it. And I was actually surprised by the difference between disc 1 and disc 2. On the first record, I found, I don't know if this is like a quality control issue, but I found it just didn't have the dynamic range that I sort of remember hearing. It felt kind of stale and lifeless, whereas when I moved to disc 2, it was very different. Like, it was very lively, like the orchestra felt very, very spacious, and like the music was just way more impactful than the first disc. So I wonder if that's a quality control of the actual like stamping of the record or the mastering or recording. I'm not sure, but that I found sort of strange about the music experience. Now, one thing I've realized that I've missed since the Disney takeover is the 20th Century Fox fanfare. I just remember that was kind of an exciting preamble to the movies, and it was sort of expected every time. So, in the theater, the lights would dim, you'd hear that theme. Again, it would kind of fade to darkness, you'd get that, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and then bam, John Williams music. So it just made for kind of an exciting experience, and I'm hoping with Disney's takeover of Fox, that's something that they could include back into the films, just because it gives another sense of that connection to that original trilogy. And maybe it's jumping on the nostalgia train, but it just kind of gives a nice, exciting feel to the films. Originally, I was never going to buy A New Hope on vinyl because as I was growing my vinyl collection, I always had the thought of like, I'm going to be very careful and not just get every single album that I have already had. I wanted to be more selective because honestly, vinyl is very expensive, and it's getting more expensive with these repressings because they sell for like $30 plus, really, brand new, and then previous pressings used now have shot up in price. So I thought, because I've listened to this so extensively over the course of my life, I'm not really going to get it because I've heard it all. I could just listen to the CD or digital version. So originally I just got Empire Strikes Back, and I thought, okay, that's my favorite one. I'm just going to get that. Well, then Return of the Jedi came on sale, so I got that. And then this collector set came out, and I thought, holy crap, like this is amazing. I need to own this as well. So here we are. I have all three now of the original trilogy. Now, again, one of my disappointments as that box set is it doesn't get that Lord of the Rings treatment where you see they release like the complete recordings. It's got, I think, 6 LPs, and they just load it with music, where that's where I prefer the effort go here. Rather than the extra gimmicky stuff, I prefer a focus on the music. So speaking of the gimmicky stuff, that's where we get to disc number 3. And this is, I think, a love it or meh kind of situation for a lot of people. So disc 3 includes a bonus track and hologram of the Death Star. And on the opposite side of that is an etching of the 40th anniversary logo. Now, one of my issues with this is it only really shows up in certain light. So in some cases, you have to like shine a flashlight right on it to actually see it. And then the other issue is like, what are you actually going to do with this third disc? With the hologram, aside from kind of standing over it with a flashlight, looking at it for 30 seconds and being like, huh, that's cool. Are you gonna do that every time? Like, I don't think a lot of people are going to bust out that third disc just to listen to that one track and see the hologram. And then with the other side, like the etching, I guess some people might frame that or maybe keep it on their turntable as a decorative piece. But in that case, I would rather just get, actual turntable mat or something with that same logo. So I don't really know what to do with that third LP. I think it's just going to sit nicely in its sleeve until maybe I want to sell it if it's worth something one day. Probably not. So it's kind of worthless to me, and definitely just on the kind of gimmicky side. Or some of you may have issue with kind of me calling it gimmicky because you're like, oh, cool, that's the collector's thing that I want. So I think it's going to be a hit and miss for a lot of people. Again, I agree, super cool, well executed, but I'm not really going to look at it very often, whereas I'll actually play the music from time to time. So in the end, should you buy this? I'm going to give it a reluctant yes. It's for people, like, you have to be a big Star Wars fan, a big film score fan, and a big vinyl fan. And if you kind of check all those boxes, then yeah, I think it's for you. It probably might be worth something or rise in value over time, as a lot of Star Wars things do. I'm not sure how limited this is because it's still available after 2 years purchased new. So, there may be thousands of these out there that make it not that valuable if that's kind of the angle you're coming from. As a collector, it's a beautiful, really beautiful piece to own, and hopefully that they continue doing that. So if they give this album the treatment, ideally they do that for The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi as well. Otherwise, there's just kind of a mishmash of different releases that don't kind of flow together. That's one frustrating thing about the prequel trilogy. We have an extended edition CD set of The Phantom Menace, but then we don't have that treatment for the other 2 films, where the music is actually like quite a good part of the prequel trilogy. So kind of for all the films, it'd be nice to have a proper kind of box set for each of the films on vinyl, and that it's like a nice cohesive collection. So thanks for tuning into the first episode of Popcorn and Vinyl. We'll definitely talk about the other Star Wars films in future episodes after I get through a lot of other ones that I want to talk about. And I would love to hear your thoughts and open up the discussion a little bit about which pressing is your favorite, because there's been so many, or which release. And do you prefer those concert orchestrations, or do you prefer kind of the film music as heard in the movie in that chronological order? Which do you prefer? So thank you for watching, and till next time, Popcorn and Vinyl will return.